quite as annoying. Okay, I'm just doing introductions at the moment because we're going to move right into Ann Lowery's presentation. Just want to thank you all for coming. Thank everybody who's already online watching, and everybody who will watch later when we post the final version of this. So Ann has to leave. So we're going to jump right into Ann Lowery, who is our Assistant Commissioner for Policy and Planning.
Planning and Evaluation.
For Planning and Evaluation. It's something like that. So, Ann.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Is this picking up? Am I speaking loud enough?
Yes.
Is it close enough? Okay, great. Good morning, and thank you for your interest in this topic, the climate adaptation work and hazard mitigation work that's recently been completed. Actually, a big stage has been completed by the Commonwealth. I'd first like to let you know that much of this presentation and much of this work is a collaborative effort between the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, between the Executive Office of Public Safety and MEMA, our Mass Emergency Management Association. I think that's what the A is for. So I'm going to speak this morning about the Integrated Hazard Mitigation and Adaptation Plan. It began with the Executive Order 569. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that executive order, which was signed almost 2 years ago today. Talk a little bit about the Hazard Mitigation and Adaptation Plan itself, which was just recently issued. And then a little bit more about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, or MVP program, which is being implemented by EOEEA, Energy and Environmental Affairs, and for municipal preparedness and adaptation efforts. So this is a schematic of a lot of different kinds of adaptation and mitigation, climate-related work that the Commonwealth as a whole is involved with, and particularly MassDEP and EEA. If you don't know all of these acronyms, I would not be surprised. The MEGECP is the New England Governors Eastern Canadian Premiers Group of governors and premiers from Canada who work together for regional goals for climate. They're generally mitigation goals, so I think the most recent ones have been related to electric vehicles. I've already mentioned the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program administered by EOEEA, which is directed at municipalities and improving their capacity and preparedness. You can see the State Climate Adaptation Plan there, which this schema was created before the plan was actually issued. We had a climate adaptation plan that was published in 2011. Some time ago. It had a number of different chapters and sections for different areas of preparedness. For example, public health was one of the chapters, and that is available on the website. It was finished in 2011, and then the Executive Order 569 also called for a number of these efforts to be furthered or advanced, including the Global Warming Solutions Act implementation, which is the GWSA acronym up there, implementation and promulgation of the 3D regs, which refers to a section of the Global Warming Solutions Act, fondly known as 3D. Those are regulations that DEP has promulgated that primarily address mitigation efforts in different sectors and create a declining annual cap for GHG emissions from those sectors. The U.S. Climate Alliance is a group of states and I believe NGOs as well who have joined together after President Trump announced we would be withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord, the U.S. Climate Alliance has as its foundational principle that the continued effort to meet the Paris climate goals. The Green Communities Act, down at the bottom, is a program administered also by EOEEA for municipalities, and it's primarily directed towards fostering and supporting energy efficiency and clean energy improvements, as well as other green efforts. CZM administers coastal resiliency grants, refers to regional greenhouse gas initiative, regional consortium of 9 states, administer our cap and trade program for the electric sector, for CO2 emissions. As you can see, there's a lot going on. This is an old slide actually going on. This is an old slide actually that pulled out yesterday. The most recent thing that's really implementation of the executive order that Governor Baker signed almost 2 years ago, almost exactly, Executive Order 569, which called for an integrated climate strategy for the Commonwealth. Integrated meaning that the strategy would address both mitigation and adaptation measures, and it would integrate adaptation goals with hazard mitigation work. So the FEMA mitigation planning, which we have been doing for many years, requires a plan that is updated every 5 years. And that plan qualifies the Commonwealth then for disaster relief funding. This time around, the 2018 revision, we decided to, or Governor Baker 2 years ago decided that it should be an integrated climate change adaptation and hazard mitigation plan. And that vision was embodied in the executive order that was signed September 16, 2016. It did recognize the significant impacts from climate change that were already occurring back in 2016 and continue to occur. It also envisioned this integrated approach, integrating mitigation efforts, mitigation of GHG emissions, as well as adapting to the changes that are already happening. And as a goal, it established this goal down here in this last bullet to protect life, property, natural resources, and our economy from the impacts of climate change. It was going to build on the state adaptation plan, first published in 2011. It called on all agencies to perform a vulnerability assessment of the agency's critical mission and functions and services, populations served, and established the MVP program to build municipal capacity and improve the preparedness of our municipalities. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It requires all the agencies and secretaries to appoint climate coordinators so that there is some overarching coordination for all agencies. And in terms of governance, the principle really was put into this executive order that climate work should be integrated into work that is done every day, that climate should be a factor that is considered in our everyday work and should be integrated into policies, regulations, and our activities as a state. So the State Hazard Mitigation and Adaptation Plan was just adopted September 17th, last Thursday. It is now available on this website, resilientma.com, where a lot of materials can be found. It is a first in the nation integrated plan, which means it's the first time a state has integrated the hazard mitigation plan for FEMA with the climate adaptation plan. And I read on the website that it has been approved by FEMA. So we have a new 2018 hazard mitigation plan, which includes new adaptation elements right now. And again, the principle is to mainstream our climate change activities and build them into our planning, budgeting, and other activities. So the added elements that were included in the plan, which I confess I have not read through in its entirety. I encourage you to go to resilientma.com to read it. The elements include some climate change projections for Massachusetts, and I'll pass this around too. I think we have a small enough crowd that you might be interested in looking at. This is just a printout of the executive summary, so I'll let you take a look, or afterwards if you don't get to it. So the elements include some climate change projections for Massachusetts. That was a collaborative effort that was done through the Northeast Climate Science Center out at UMass Amherst and EOEEA. And those climate change projections are actually downscaled to a municipal level, so they're intended to be very useful for municipal planning and statewide planning. It includes agency vulnerability assessments for 80 agencies, 80 state agencies, and action items that were identified by those agencies to improve their preparedness and resiliency in the face of a variety of climate hazards. It does do some overarching organization of the different kinds of risks, the most prevalent risks, and vulnerabilities presented in the Commonwealth. Some of that is in this executive summary, and obviously in more detail in the bigger report. It also addresses our current adaptive capacity. There's the positive side of this as well, and that we are fairly well prepared in some areas. Can't forget that. The executive order created this Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, or MVP program, for municipalities, which used this Community Resilience Building Workshop, which was developed by an NGO. The name escapes me. It'll come back. And the workshops are intended to be grassroots meetings of people in a municipality who are interested and know the locality very well, know the vulnerabilities, know the history of extreme climate events, and and the infrastructure that is present in the locality. After a workshop, which can be facilitated by a certified MVP facilitator, the end result is an action plan for the municipality. The potential courses of action are prioritized by the group and made into an action plan, chosen by the by that group itself, and then endorsed by a municipal entity. The municipality can then become certified as an MVP community, and then becomes eligible for grant money through EEA and the MVP program. Those action items, again, are chosen by that workshop group, and at this point there have been 2 rounds of grant funding in the MVP program. The first round was for planning and was for identifying and training the facilitators for those workshops. The second round, that was just distributed this last summer, I think in June, were for action grants to actually start working on some of those items that were identified as the next steps to move forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the climate data that's now available online. This is also available in the Climate Clearinghouse, which is this lower graphic off to the right, the Massachusetts Climate Clearinghouse. It includes a lot of the data that was developed with the Northeast Climate Science Center, statewide and downscaled, so that at the municipal level there's a lot of information about risk and preparedness. This is, again, a little more information about the Climate Change Clearinghouse. Along the bottom, if we can see it, it sets out the different stages of working through the MVP program. So engaging the community, having that grassroots group of interested stakeholders, do the workshop activities and come up with an action plan. The second step is to identify the climate change impacts locally and the targets, and then complete the vulnerability assessment and prioritize the vulnerability and create the action plan. Here's the website for the clearinghouse, and you can see along the bottom the different layers of data that are now available. It's quite a robust set of data. I encourage you to take a look. Again, this is more information about the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. In terms of waste sites that might be included or folded into an action plan or be considered as part of this MVP planning process, I know Tom will probably talk about that a little bit further, but it's entirely possible that a waste site could be identified as a priority, as being a point of vulnerability for a municipality, and would be included in an MVP action plan. These are some photos of those workshops. And at this point, this is an outdated graphic of the Commonwealth, but the tally is correct below, that nearly half of Massachusetts municipalities are now participating in the MVP program, and I believe over $7 million has been distributed both for planning and for the action grants to the MVP municipalities. So it's quickly gaining some momentum. On the horizon for the MVP program is to continue to increase the capacity for the participating municipalities. The governor has signed the environmental bond bill recently, which provides for more funding for the MVP program and actually establishes the program in statute instead of through an executive order and a directive to the Secretariat. It continues to have as its goal mainstreaming climate work at the municipal level to improve our planning at the municipal level and our preparedness. And it was the Nature Conservancy's model, I can see this now, that created the workshop model. They've been national leaders on sharing that model of creating those action plans across the country. In terms of the state agency activities, MassDEP was one of the 80 agencies that did a vulnerability assessment, and we are going to be continuing to address that action items that we've identified. They include increasing the resiliency of our buildings, of our staff, our planning in cases of emergency, and continuing to embed our climate work in policy development, regulatory development, etc. Our mitigation work for greenhouse gas emissions will continue. There's a lot of work being done by the Bureau of Air and Waste, especially recently on all of the air regulations that the Bureau has been promulgating. We will also continue to provide a lot of technical assistance to municipalities for mitigation and adaptation measures. And that's all I have in terms of prepared remarks. I'm happy to take any questions or turn it over to Tom if there are no questions. Yes?
Hi, I have a question. I've been through the MVP process, which I think is excellent. As a conservation commissioner in the town of Arlington, so we're an MVP community. We went through the first stage. We also were just recently awarded a grant to do a pilot project under the MVP of almost $400,000, which is great for Arlington. So I'm a strong supporter of the process. However, I don't think it's adequate in the Commonwealth to rely on municipalities and communities to identify vulnerable vulnerabilities at hazardous waste sites in their communities. I don't think they understand those vulnerabilities that well. I think they're more focused on flooding, heat islands, things like that, and that I think the state needs to take a lead role in identifying where those vulnerabilities are from the haz waste perspective. You know, just thinking about what happened recently with Florence, with coal ash, and you know, manure wastes from animal facilities getting into waterways. We don't want that kind of thing happening in Massachusetts.
Thank you. That's a very timely and pertinent comment. And I know the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup has been doing some work, particularly with flood risk and wayside cleanup sites, evaluating their vulnerability. And I know Tom Potter is leading the way on that. So actually, that's kind of a segue over to Tom, unless there are any other questions. He's going to talk more about that effort that's ongoing.
One question. My other job, I teach environmental geology in Bridgewater State, and other than the webpage, are there any educational materials that I can get access to?
I would encourage you to explore the webpage, first of all. Yeah. There's a lot of information there, particularly the science. If you're teaching a science, geology-oriented class, I think there's a lot of information from the Northland Science Center. Okay. All right. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ann.